Hey everyone, it's Ryan Zomorodi with Real Estate Skills. And today I brought back a special guest, Tim, who's an employee at one of our companies. Today we're going to be covering everything a beginner needs to know about real estate comparables, also known as real estate comps. If you want to get your hands on our real estate comp criteria, which we use in all of our real estate acquisitions and wholesale deals, go ahead and click the link in the description to download our Real Estate Skills comp criteria cheat sheet. So, Tim, what would you like to know about real estate comps?
Everything, absolutely everything. Real estate comps has been, brought up in kind of our previous videos by you and Alex, and kind of as I'm going through the system myself, it becomes apparent that the accuracy of real estate comps just becomes more and more important and kind of compiles into every single process down the line after finding them, right? So, just to be sure, thank you for being with me today and to explain everything I need to know as a beginner about real estate comps. So I guess first, on a very high level, like what exactly are comps? What exactly are real estate comparables?
Yeah, great question. Let's start at the top. So, as you mentioned, real estate comps are so essential to the real estate industry as a whole, and it does affect a lot of other processes. Because ultimately, it's the basis of valuation in real estate. How do you determine property value? You use real estate comps. So, a real estate comp is a comparable sale that is similar in many features and characteristics as a given subject property. So, real estate comp is generally a sold property or a listed property near a subject property that has, again, similar property type. You want to be comparing to as close to the subject property as possible. And you want to pull sold properties because ultimately that's going to determine the market value of a given property. So, what is market value? It's really a snapshot in time that a certain property is likely to get as far as what's going to be sold on the open market. There's a concept of a willing buyer and a willing seller. And so you run real estate comps to determine where are comparable properties, where are similar properties exchanging hands on the open marketplace. So that when you as an investor, you're looking to buy a property, maybe you're just looking to buy a property to live in, you want to make sure that you're not overpaying for a property. Ideally, you'd be underpaying because that means you're getting a great deal. But ultimately, real estate comps serve as a benchmark of value in a marketplace.
Right. So I know it's used in kind of like every avenue of real estate investing, right? So the importance of it, it's come to me as a beginner wholesaler as to why comparables are so important, but why are they so important like down the line? Say I want to like fix and flip houses one day. Say I want to purchase rental properties one day. Like why is knowing or having accurate real estate comps like so important in those aspects?
Totally. So imagine you're looking to buy a 1,200 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath property in an area. You can't look at comparable sales of multifamily properties in that same neighborhood and use those sold values to determine the price that you should be paying for your property, right? So having accurate real estate comps allows you as a buyer to determine what is a good price for your property, and sometimes even more importantly, if you're going to be obtaining financing on a property, a lender is required to run an appraisal of that property. And in running appraisals, appraisers need to pull real estate comps to determine what the real estate is worth. So ultimately, that lender will give you a loan with you pledging that property as collateral for that loan.
Right.
And so lenders will ultimately give you a value of that property based on the appraisal, and any appraisal of residential property is going to use real estate comps in order to arrive at a value.
Right.
So a lot of real estate contracts have contingencies in place, one of which is an appraisal contingency. So that protects you as a buyer from buying a property that is not going to appraise for at least as much as you're looking to buy the property for. So let's say you offered $500,000 for a property that it might have been listed for $400,000, but sometimes markets are very competitive and buyers sometimes get into a bidding war, and so that price might drive up to $500,000. And so, but you might have a contingency in your contract that says, if it doesn't appraise for $500,000, I'm allowed to either move forward or I can back out of that contract and walk away unharmed, and my earnest money deposit gets refunded back to me as the buyer. So that is also something that a lot of buyers incorporate that does rely on real estate comps to make sure that they're getting a fair deal, to make sure that they're not completely overpaying.
Right.
And, some buyers will be okay with that. So it really just is market dependent, which is why pulling appropriate comps is very important, because every single real estate market is different, right? You have markets where you can have a brand new, beautiful, modern new construction that will sell for the same gross value as in another market you have a total fixer that's about to fall down to the ground and is pretty much a scrape and development deal.
Right.
So markets are so different. So you have to focus on micro local comps to whatever property you're purchasing to ultimately determine if this property is worth what you're paying for, and then what kind of loan can I also get on the property as well. So it all comes down to the specific subject property, and every appraisal is going to be different because every property is unique, which is kind of one of the really cool and exciting things about real estate in general, and certainly when you're appraising properties.
Yeah. A little bit more on appraisals really quick, because I'm getting them kind of, I guess, like synonymous in my head. So is there a real difference between like an appraisal and a comp? I know you mentioned before that comps are used for appraisers, but like what's the actual difference between those two like terms?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think a lot of people will use them interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So a real estate comp is a data point. A real estate comp is a particular property that has either been listed on the market or that has recently sold and is now a data point for you as a buyer, for an appraiser, whoever's going to form an opinion of value. They use that comp as a data point to then determine what value really is in a marketplace. So I like to make the analogy of, comps are facts, comps are data points, because everyone has access to these facts and they're undisputable because they're recorded. It's public records or it's in the MLS. Like, these are factual pieces of data, such as the sales price, such as the characteristics of a property, how large it is, how many rooms it has, beds and baths, what's the lot size. All of these are pieces of data that go into the real estate comp itself.
Right.
So what an appraisal is taking all that data and then forming an opinion, is forming an opinion of value. So an appraisal is not a fact. An appraisal is an opinion, and that is very subjective. It's using objective data to create a subjective determination, right, and an estimate, an opinion of value. So you might have two different appraisals on the same property at the same time, and you might get two different values.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it really is, by definition, it's an opinion of value, which is using data points that are available in the marketplace, and appraisers specialize in taking these comps and then trying to find the most relevant sales data to whatever property they are appraising, and then making adjustments for how do those sold pieces of property compare to the property that is being appraised at hand.
Right. So in that kind of process, then, say, me as a beginner, how many kind of comps do you recommend I find for that kind of valuation? To me, it's like, if there's one similar house, I mean, to me, maybe that's fine. But how many would you recommend, and what would you do if, like, maybe there's not enough comps in the designated area that I'm looking in?
Yeah, totally. So, appraisers will be required to use at least 3 comps. And so, whatever an appraiser does, like, I like to study that, and I like to study appraisers and appraisals because their approach to valuing real estate is something that we want to mimic as investors, as wholesalers, as purchasers of real estate, so we can then identify value for ourselves. So they are required to use at least 3 comparable sales. They use sold properties. You can't use a pending sale. You can't use something that hasn't closed yet. Even listed properties are not factored into an appraisal, an appraised value. So you have to use at least 3 sold properties, because that is indicative of where a buyer and a seller have met. It's a meeting of the minds. They've settled on a price. And there's a lot of other factors that go into it besides the price, but appraisers will use at least 3, sometimes up to 5, maybe more. And then they will look at all of the data, and then they'll ultimately determine which one is the most relevant comp, and then that will give more weight to their ultimate valuation.
Right.
So what happens when there are not comps is your question. So great question. We get that all the time in our communities with our students. So there will be times when you're in a market where it's either a very highly coveted area where no one's selling because it's a buy and hold forever type of area. It's great real estate and there's not a lot of sales activity. So it can be very highly desirable. Or you might be in a very rural area where you have very large properties, but there's just
it's not property for miles, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just farmland, agricultural areas where there's not a lot of population, not a lot of investment happening, and so oftentimes there's just not a lot of similar properties that have been sold. So, so you can go back in time to really just look to see if anything has sold in the past, 6 months, year, 2 years. You definitely want to stick within our comp criteria, that we have here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But essentially, you can go outside of that criteria a bit if you can't find properties that have sold that really fit within what we're looking for, right? As far as being, comparing apples to apples, right? You want to compare similar properties to similar properties. So you just have to go a little bit outside of the box. Proximity is one of the most important things. They always say the number one aspect of real estate, the number one important factor of real estate is location.
Right.
And so location is one of the things, it might be the only thing that you can't change about a property. The location is what it is. So that's really number one as far as finding similar properties. Proximity is so important. So, we always recommend at least staying within a half-a mile radius. But it's even more important just to have a similar neighborhood, similar characteristics, and just being as close as possible.
Yeah.
So
even though we might not hit everything in the criteria that we can, it's still the best estimated guess minus 1 or 2 things. You still have to look in that area as close as you can. It's itself, I feel, right?
Yeah.
Would you recommend? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to be in one subdivision where you're buying a property in one subdivision and now you're pulling comps in a different community altogether. Some areas are much higher desirability than others. Some might have different amenities. So you generally don't want to cross any major roads or big landmarks. There are some cities, especially very dense urban areas, where things can change block by block.
Yeah.
And so the closer you are to the subject property, the better off you're going to be, as well as the most recent sales have the heavier weight. So if a property sold last week, it's going to carry a lot more weight than something that sold 6 months ago.
Right.
Because especially right now, the market's changing, interest rates are fluctuating, inventory can fluctuate as well. So the more recent you are to today, whenever you're running that appraisal, whenever you're running your comps, then the better off you're going to be in getting a more realistic snapshot of what your property's worth today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I've been, I don't have my real estate license. I'm really just looking on Redfin currently. Are there better ways to find these real estate comps? And I guess what's the best way and what do you recommend to the students you have?
Yeah, for sure. If Redfin is active in your market, then I would always just go there because everyone has access to it. And most of the data is going to be there.
Yeah.
So there are markets where Redfin isn't active in. So you can always check out Zillow or Realtor.com. There's some other websites that are similar to that. If you have MLS access, I would say that is really the best way to pull comps in your market. So whether you have your own direct MLS access if you have MLS assistant access, like we teach our students how to obtain, as well as if you just know a real estate agent or a real estate broker,
Yeah.
they all have MLS access too. So you can ask them to pull comps for you,
Yeah.
and you can get that data that way. That's probably how most people get their comps, is from a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of a real estate agent and broker's job, is to run comps and to really know how to work this process. Because that's really that's the foundation of valuation, is pulling those comps. So comps are used for, listings as well. So, real estate agents who are pulling comps to determine whether or not they want to take a listing.
Right.
Because if a seller thinks their property is worth $10 million, but in reality the comps are showing that it's only worth $7 million, then a listing agent probably doesn't want to take that listing unless they can convince the seller that, your expectation of what this property is worth is not where I'm going to be able to sell it for, and I'm just going to be wasting my time with this listing. So part of it is, understanding and educating, buyers and sellers where the market is for their property, because some sellers are very emotionally attached to their properties. They think their property is worth a lot more, but if a buyer can purchase the same property for a certain price, then why would they pay more for any particular property? Which is where kind of the foundation of these appraisals and the appraisal adjustments come in. So comparing apples to apples, but it's very hard to find identical properties. So you always have to make adjustments for that value.
Right. Yeah.
Again, the MLS is an amazing resource. All those other third-party sites, they pull from the MLS. So if you can get MLS access, that's the best place to go for comps. You can also look at public records, so county records, tax assessor websites as well. That's where you can find some comps, sometimes that aren't in the MLS. You can look at the public records as well. There are some software that can pull it for you. I use a software that my title officer, my title company gives me access to, which can search the whole country for, you can pull property reports for any parcel in the country, and then it will just list a bunch of comps for you. There are other software like, PropStream is a very popular one, Privy as well, that can pull comps for you. But I always encourage investors and anyone who's serious about being in this business. We teach a lot of wholesalers.
Yeah.
Learn how to run your own real estate comps. Like, learn how to, use our comp criteria to then go on any of these websites and know how to pull appropriate comps, so that you can find the comps that might slip through the cracks with these automated software. And, we don't want to rely on any, real estate comp software to pull them for us, right? We need to be our own detectives, and we need to really have the urgency and the integrity with our valuations, as if we're going to be buying these properties, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're wholesaling, you want to be looking at comps and running your valuations as if it's your money that you're going to be buying the property.
Yeah.
So I think there's a change of mindset. Like, if you're like, hey, this is my money, I'm going to be, buying this property. I want to make sure that I'm pulling the right comps, and I'm taking the time needed to properly appraise this property, versus just, hey, I'm going to just choose comps that support the highest value possible, just because I'm trying to wholesale this deal and squeeze every dollar out of it. Or for listing agents, I'm just trying to sell this for an exorbitant amount just to please my seller, just to get this listing. So that's why I really love real estate comps, because it's facts, right? It's data.
Yeah.
And I always like to say the deals are in the data. And so when you learn to love the data, you learn to find the data, you can scrape these websites and aggregate it in a systematic fashion, then that's going to put you in a position of power as an investor, a position of knowledge, right? When you're negotiating on properties, when you're trying to get the best deal. They often say you make your money when you buy real estate. So if you can buy right, then you're going to win every time. So that's really some of the importance of it as well, as an individual home buyer or as an investor, like yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out too, because I've seen your cash buyer videos, and kind of the way you talk to them, it's like you have so much knowledge about the area and the property, and it was all because you've done all of this, you know, and the way you like eloquently put it to your cash buyer and things like that. It's like, if I was just to automate it with like a software, I probably wouldn't have that knowledge without actually doing it myself. So while there's pros to the automation, also I'm losing out on, you know, the actual knowledge that a cash buyer, whoever you're gonna sell it to, like might honestly like appreciate and want, you know. So it's really good that you said that. I like that a lot.
Totally.
So just to, you know, high level review, real estate comps are comparable properties to your subject property. So if I was wholesaling, you know, say a 1-2 bedroom in San Diego, I want to find properties like that that have been, I guess, renovated, and then potentially I can use that as a selling point to whoever's going to pick that contract up, because they're going to be like, oh, I can make $20,000 because this rundown distressed property is like this renovated one right next to it. And if I renovate the same way, I'll make that money. It's very important to have those numbers correct, because if you don't have them correct, we could all lose money. So everybody relies on these comps. You recommend the MLS to find them accurately if I have a relationship with a real estate agent, but Redfin is also good. Zillow is also good. Probably start with those as a beginner. And then say I'm starting my first deal, still have to do that. Say I'm on Redfin, Zillow, MLS right now. What are the rules I need to follow to find these comps? I guess on a high level, like what kind of bullet points do you recommend? I look at, I know you mentioned location as one of the bigger ones, but if we could just like run through like what's the most important factors for comps.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, location's the most important thing when you're trying to compare apples to apples. I always suggest, you know, our students and anyone who's looking to run comps, you know, make sure it's at least in the same zip code. But even a zip code can be a very large place. So you always want to look at the map and make sure that any comps you're pulling are at least within, you know, half a mile radius. That's like a good place to start. But even then, you want to look at the map and see within that half a mile radius, are there any major roads that you might cross? Are there train tracks? Are there any big landmarks, or, you know, any major attractions that might sway value one way or another? Like, for example, if your property is, you know, a quarter mile closer to the ocean than another property, then it's probably going to be worth a lot more, right? So you just have to understand like what the general location is, and so you want to compare properties that are in a very similar location, right? If it's on the same street, like that's amazing. You know, I always love properties that are on the same street, but oftentimes we can't find that.
Yeah.
So usually I'll just, you know, plug in the address of the subject property, look at the half a mile radius first and foremost, and then you want to make sure you're comparing similar properties.
Right.
So you can't compare a single family house to a condo. You can't compare a townhouse to a mobile home, right? So it needs to be apples to apples. So, you know, single family detached house, you always want to pull single family detached home comparables. And so if it's a condo, again, you want to look at condos. And if you're looking at multifamily, again, you want to look at similar multifamily as well. So it has to be the same property type, of course. And then also you want to look at the same size of structure, right? You want to make sure that the square footage is at least within a 20% plus or minus of the subject property square footage. So you don't want to go over 20% from the subject property and under 20%. So that's a general rule that we like to stick to. We recommend, because there's different buyers for different sizes of properties, right? You know, if you have a big family, they're going to need a much bigger house. So depending on where you are, it's you want to kind of keep it within that same square footage.
Yeah.
And then, you know, bed bath count is also very important. So again, it goes down to the type of buyer, the desirability of a house. So ideally, you want to have the same bedroom and bathroom count when you're looking at comparables to your subject property. So there are exceptions. Again, your question before, what happens if you can't find any comps? Then you can go outside of that. So we always, you know, want to look for the best comps initially. And so again, the best comps are within that radius of a half a mile, or within the same neighborhood or subdivision. Really just have Similar curb appeal as well, I think, is often overlooked, by new investors, new wholesalers. I always love walking the street on a Google Street View to just get a feel for, are there power lines on the street in front of our subject property? How are the neighbors? You want to get to know the neighborhood as well and just make sure there aren't any eyesores next door, right? There's not a big lot full of cars next to your property or any high density multifamily or commercial buildings. You don't want to be next to a gas station ideally. So different factors will determine whether or not a comparable is really the same. Furthermore, you have different features like lot size as well.
Yeah.
The size of lot can be a big factor, and that can vary market to market. But you generally want to have a similar lot size. If it's in an HOA, you want to be within the same HOA if possible, which again is a homeowners association.
Yeah.
So if you're in a gated community, you want to stick within that same gated community ideally. If you go outside of it, the values can fluctuate significantly.
Right.
Furthermore, obviously the zoning is a big impact too. So you want to make sure that it's a zone for the same use. Generally, single family is what they're allowed to build on that lot. So single family to single family. You don't want to be comparing a commercial property to a condo unit that's meant to be used by an owner occupant for living purposes, for residential purposes.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of a more advanced for me, but now it's like pressing in my mind. Say it's like I'm looking into like a multifamily, like an apartment building, or even something like commercial real estate, like business offices or something. I guess my first question is, when the property size gets bigger, I feel like it might be harder to find things in the area around it. Like say there's only one office building in however many miles or something. There's only one apartment complex in however many miles. Have you ever run into like that kind of situation where it's like, I can't really guess? And if you couldn't, like, how did you tackle that problem?
Yeah. So it depends, when we're talking about commercial real estate, we're talking about multifamily above 5 units, or actually above 4 units. So there's a different method of valuation when it comes to income producing real estate that. So I think it's worth mentioning now. So what we're talking about, real estate comps are a really essential part of all valuation, but primarily there's 3 different types of valuation in real estate. There's 3 different approaches to valuation in real estate. The first of which is pretty much what we're talking about here, is the sales comparison approach, which is using comparable sales to determine the valuation. So that's really mainly what we're talking about today and what is most applicable and most widely used in residential real estate sales and appraisals. The second of which is the cost approach. So the cost approach is essentially taking the value of the land itself and then also the value of the improvements on that land. So the structure, right, the building that's built on the land. So they factor in what's the replacement cost of that property. So they'll use data, they'll use comparables to say, what does it cost in this market to replace buildings like this? Usually they use a cost per square foot. They might say, hey, this building, if I were to build it today, would cost $280 per square foot to replace it. So then they can derive a value of the structure, and then they'll take the value of the land. They also factor in, what's the age of the structure. They call it depreciation. And so that's another way they can determine value from what does it cost to replace a similar property.
Right.
So that's less often used. A lot of times it's used in new construction when there aren't a ton of new sales around the area. The third, which is really to your point of with apartment complexes, with commercial real estate, with real estate where buyers are more interested in the income, right? They're buying the income stream that it produces. That is called the income approach. So that is where you actually you do look at comparable sales, but you derive value from the net income that a piece of real estate produces, and then you capitalize that income using what's called a capitalization rate. So it's a different approach. We can definitely get into that, but what we're really primarily concerned is comparable sales.
Yeah.
So if you were looking at an apartment complex, you can then ask a real estate broker or just study some of the comps and say, hey, what is the cap rate that comparable properties are selling for in this general market?
Yeah.
And then you can find out what that property is producing in income and then derive a value from that based on the cap rate. There's also the gross rent multiplier. And so there's different, math you can do to derive some kind of a value from it. But you don't typically do that with residential properties, single family properties. So the most commonly used is that sales comparison approach, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that while you might not have all the data points that you want, there's always a way to find something to compare to your property. There's always a way. And these 3 methods are kind of covering all of those, even though I don't have something in my location, this, property could produce income that somebody would want. So it's like, it's compared that way instead. That's actually, it's really interesting. It's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So you'll see in appraisals, like I actually brought an appraisal here because I thought it's just super useful. There's sections in this appraisal where they can derive a different value based on the different approaches, and then it's up to the appraiser to determine which valuation method is most appropriate for that subject property. So, for everyday investors, for wholesalers, for house flippers, you're generally going to use a sales comparison approach. But if you are wholesaling or flipping to buy and hold investors who are looking to become landlords and purchase rental properties, then you might use the income approach, because that's ultimately what your buyers are looking for. They're looking for that income stream. So I think, to your point, there are ways to find a baseline of value, even when there aren't similar properties or if there aren't any good real estate comps in your area. There's different ways to derive a value from it. So we can kind of go a little deeper into what happens, when you can't find those comps.
Yeah. Well, as a beginner, I'm scared and hesitant. So before we kind of dive into that, but I do want to I'm a very step-by-step learner kind of guy. So let's just say, I'm at my computer, I'm ready to go. I have all the information. Can you give me a step-by-step process of finding real estate comps?
Absolutely. So what I would do is I would go to your favorite, either your MLS or you'd hop on Redfin, Zillow, and then you can simply just open up the browser. Those are all free, which is why I generally start with those recommendations to hop on. And you have access pretty much to the whole country, which is amazing. We train a lot of wholesalers to flip contracts in other states across the country, a lot of virtual wholesaling going on in our community. So what I love about, Redfin is that you can find and analyze deals within a few seconds, really. Just by hopping on. So I would just go on Redfin and then type in a location. So you always want to start with the location or the subject property itself. So basically start with that property, start with that zip code to understand, where am I looking first and foremost. So you might type in, a particular zip code, and then on Redfin, it's going to show you that area. And so if you're not sure where your property is, then you might just want to plug in the property address to start there.
Right.
And then from there, these websites give you an option to look at the surrounding area immediately around that property. So there's a view on Redfin where you can look at nearby homes to the subject property, and that will open up a map of your area, and then you can see all of the for sale properties in the area. But again, if we're looking for real estate comps, I always do like to look at for sale listings just because it gives you an idea of what the competition is.
Right.
What else is on the market. So there's that principle of substitution where it's like, hey, why would I buy this property for this price when there's a comparable property for 10% lower down the street? So it's a good idea to see the competition first and just get a feel for your marketplace. I think it's good for any home buyer, for any real estate investor, anyone looking to do deals. Even if you're an agent listing a property, you have to get to know your market. So you want to look at the listed properties too. But for valuation purposes, you want to look at the sold properties. So there's always a filter on these websites to look at all of the sold properties. and then you can designate how far back do you want to go. So I would start with 3 months. So basically looking from today and then 3 months back, what has sold in this area around the property. And so then it'll show you what are those values. And then now you can start to sort those properties by square footage, by proximity to your property. And then you can start to sift through and then understand if there are comparable properties, right, in size, in bed bath count. And then ultimately you can now compile a list of which ones of these properties that have sold recently are more alike to my property, right? Which ones are the most similar to my property. So once you have that list, then you can start to make adjustments based on the characteristics of those properties compared to yours. So I always like to study appraisals. Like I get geeked out whenever I buy a property or if I do a refinance on a property. So this was a refinance that I did earlier in this year, and it was a very unique property that has a ton of land value that's prime for redevelopment. So I was just very excited to get this appraisal in my hands, and I always read them just because I understand the value and the importance of thinking like an appraiser.
Yeah.
So some of the characteristics that they look at when they're comparing, subject property to other comparable sales in a market, first and foremost, they look at the sales price, the gross sales price of a particular piece of real estate. So what did that sell for? And then also, what were the conditions of the sale? Was it a foreclosure? Was it a short sale? Was it an arm's length transaction, which just means, a traditional buyer and a seller on the market? There was no extra pressure to make the sale. There wasn't any particular motivation, like a pending foreclosure, for example, or like an auction. Those are unique circumstances that are a little bit different. So they might discount value if it was a situation where it was a distressed seller or a motivated seller, someone that was forced to sell the property.
Yeah.
So they will take into consideration like the conditions of the sale as well. Also, the financing of the sale too can make an impact as well. How is it financed? So they'll take a look at were there any seller concessions on the sale, which that just means, did the seller give any credits to the buyer or any perks to the buyer that made them move forward with the sale? So, for example, they might have given the buyer $10,000 at closing just as an incentive to move forward with the sale.
Right.
They might have given the buyer, certain repairs at closing to again make it go through.
Which then kind of skews the actual price of it. Then.
Yeah, exactly.
Because all these things go in. Yeah.
So if you have a property that sells for $1 million, but the seller gave the buyer $20,000 at closing, then you have to factor that in because it was technically it was more like a $980,000 sale versus a $1 million sale. So it is important to look at the seller concessions because there can be certain things underneath the surface of the sales price that then will impact the actual value.
Yeah.
Right. So they'll look at the conditions of the sale. They'll look at the price per square foot. So I think this is a really important metric for anyone looking to run real estate comps is like, what did that comp sell for by square foot? So look at the price per square foot of the final sold price. They'll also look at the date of the sale. So how soon did the sale occur? And I've even seen appraisers adjust the value depending on how recent the sale was or how far back it was. So if you go beyond 6 months back, in our comp criteria, we always recommend sticking within 6 months. The more recent that comp is, the more weight you want to put into that comp. But if you go beyond 6 months, then you might actually have to discount that comp because the further back you go, the less relevant that value is going to be to today's value because the market changes. Buyers come into the market, buyers go out of the market. The market's very dependent on, inventory and interest rates, new inventory hitting the market. Some markets are very seasonal as well. So again, the closer you are to today, the more relevant that value is going to be.
Right. That's why you start the 3 months then, right?
Exactly.
And then if you can't, 6.
You go a little further back.
Hopefully not a year. But
exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've gone back 2 years before.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because there's certain areas, right, when you're dealing with very coveted zip codes or just areas where properties don't transact very often, you're forced to go back in time. But it's more important to go back in time than go out further than the zip code or the relevant area, because you might be even half a mile away or a mile away. That neighborhood can be very different because maybe you're in a different school district.
That makes a lot of sense.
Maybe you're in a different zip code. Then you have access to different amenities as well.
Yeah. Because
So
when I was looking at properties, and I feel like I only found 2, but it's because I didn't actually change the date range more. And it's actually better, from what you're saying, to change that date range rather than me going 10 miles out then and 20 miles out.
sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, the half a mile radius is more for developed areas, urban areas that there are a lot of houses in an area. But if you're in a rural area, half a mile there might not be a lot of houses within half a mile. So you have to adjust it kind of like per your market.
Yeah.
So then kind of like, I'll go through this because these are all the important points that you want to pay attention to any real estate comp. It's also the site, which is the lot itself, the lot size. So in certain areas, larger lots are going to command a premium versus smaller lots. So they take a look at the size of the lot itself. The view, is there any particular view on the property? Is it an ocean view? Are you viewing a commercial gas station across the street? Is there a retail mall right across the street that might be an eyesore? So they'll take consideration of the surrounding neighborhood from that particular property as well. They also look at the design of the property, the style of construction of the property, right? Is it a ranch style house? Is it a Spanish style house architecture? Is it a bungalow? Is it a craftsman? So they want to find like properties that are similar in terms of style and architecture. So some are going to be more desirable than the rest. And, in certain areas, some styles are going to command a premium because they're going to be more weatherproof. They're going to be more modern versus other styles. So they will take a note of that. And when you're running your real estate comps, you definitely want to make sure that you have similar styles of properties if you can, right? If they are available. They'll also take into consideration, the actual age of the property. So you also want to be within the same build generation is what they call it. So within the same year, plus or minus 5 to 10 years. You want to stay as close to the same year built. And the reason for that is that building codes change, from year to year, from decade to decade. The quality of materials they put into a particular home will change over time. And some are more energy efficient. Some are more resistant to weather conditions, hurricanes, earthquakes. So the building codes change over time. And so the more recent your property has been built, usually there's more value because it's a more modern style of construction, more modern and safe building materials as well. So you want to keep it within the same build generation as well, the same actual age of the property itself, as well as the condition of the property too. So this kind of refers to, is there a lot of deferred maintenance on a property? Is there are there similar types of finishes in a property? So this is kind of something that you mentioned earlier. So there is a difference between running real estate comps for a subject property that has not been improved yet, has not been renovated by, let's say, a fix and flipper yet. So you might be running an as-is appraisal, right? So you might be you might be buying a property and you're trying to determine what the value is as is. So you'll run comps that are similar in condition, right? If you're buying a fixer, it's also good to look at what are other fixers selling for in the area. So that way you can determine what is the value right now. But if you're going to be determining the after repair value of a fixer, for example, then you're not going to be looking at the same as is comps. You're going to be looking at the renovated comps.
Yeah.
So you want to look at properties that have already been fixed up and then resold for top dollar. And so now you're talking about running comps to determine the after repair value, right? The ARV of a property. So you have to determine, what's the purpose of your valuation. Are you doing more of an as-is appraisal or an after repair value appraisal? And then you'll pull different comps depending on ultimately what's your intention with deriving that value.
Yeah. So me as a beginner real estate investor, it's like I'm right now it's 4 ARV currently because I'm trying to wholesale. So it's I'm running comps specifically for the renovated properties that were similar in a way to mine. I guess kind of piggybacking on that point, then like say a property they like added a pool or like an extra room or a garage or something. And whether it be my property or theirs, like, and say I'm the only house that either has that or the only house that doesn't have that.
Right.
Like, have you come across a situation before and like, how'd you handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll have to do what they call adjustments. So you have to determine what are similar properties selling for that have that different feature. So if you're looking at a set of 5 sold properties and only one of them has a pool, then you kind of have to determine how much more is that pool worth. So it will depend on the market. So in some areas, pools are going to command a premium because it's just, you're in a desert environment, it's very hot, and owners are always looking for pools. So appraisers in different markets have different rules that they'll follow, and they have a database of values that they'll assign to a bedroom, to a pool. And so in some markets, it might be $10,000 for a bedroom, might be $5,000 for a bathroom, and maybe $5,000 for a pool. But if you're in a higher price point market, or you're just in an area where these types of features are coveted, and they're ultimately going to be valued at a higher rate. So, so in this appraisal, for example, the bedrooms were valued at $25,000 additional per added bedroom, and the bathrooms were about $15,000 plus or minus for bedroom variations from one property to the next.
Yeah.
And then also garages are also very important. So parking, whether it's in a covered carport or an actual garage style or driveway space, they do take into consideration all of those things. So they will add or subtract value depending on if a property has those features or not.
Right.
And it really just is market dependent, how much you're going to detract or how much you're going to adjust compared to your subject property.
Yeah. Say I have the perfect kind of range. I have everything good, location. Is there ever a point, and I have not done this, so I guess I'm asking just because of inexperience, but is there ever a point where like the comps ended up being like like one was like super high, one was like not, but it's like still somewhat the same, and like how would you tackle that situation if it ever does come up?
Yeah, no, it certainly does. So I would keep digging. It's all about digging and working through this process to look at all of the data, look at all the comps. Don't just look at Redfin. Also ask a real estate agent or get MLS access and look at the MLS yourself. Talk to a title company. Title companies are flush with data, and they have access to pretty much every property that's been sold in an area. So, gather the data and, make sure you have as much data as possible, because that's really what this is all about. And so if you have that and you're still in that situation where there's identical properties that have sold for a variety of values, then you kind of want to ask why, right? You want to ask, why did one sell for much higher than the other?
Right.
And that might come down to really studying the MLS listing, some of the remarks from the agent, the conditions of the sale, like I mentioned earlier. Was there some kind of financing involved? Maybe the seller financed the deal at a very low interest rate, and so that caused the price to go significantly higher. So those are some conditions of the sale that can impact the final price. So I like to just dig as deep as possible when it comes down to determining that value, and there has to be some kind of reason why it did. And so I also like to take it a step further and call the listing agent. Who sold that property? Was there a buyer's agent or a listing agent involved in the sale? I will call them and ask them, hey, like I just saw this property. It looked like it sold for way higher than some of the comps. Was there a reason why that happened? Was there a bidding war? Was there any special terms of financing that happened? And so, especially when you're wholesaling a deal or when you're buying it to fix and flip, you want to know the details of every sale, and you want to talk to those listing agents because they have some of the best information about the market's response to a similar listing in that area.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
especially if you're going to buy, fix, and sell a property, talking to these agents and even telling them, hey, I'm looking to buy and flip a property very similar to the one that you just sold. Congratulations on that sale. I was just curious, if I were to bring a similar property to market, how was the response? Were you getting buyers lining up at the door, or was it just crickets for a lot of weeks and you got lucky? So getting a pulse check from these agents is just a really good idea, and will give you so much data that isn't available on any website or any MLS. Like, talking to the agents is invaluable and has saved me in a lot of cases, and given me data that nobody else has.
Yeah.
So once you do that, once you've really exhausted all the data, then I would generally take a more conservative approach. I wouldn't like to bet the farm that I'm going to get that top dollar if there's a property that just sold for way, that knocked it out of the park. I would just consider that more of an anomaly and not think that my property is worth that much.
Right.
When there's other deals, other properties that didn't sell for anywhere near that realm.
Yeah.
So I take a more conservative approach. Maybe you can tilt it up a little bit more, but I would err on the side of caution. When you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars on the line. Especially if it's your first investment, you want to make sure you get into the right deal.
Yeah.
You have the right, education. You have the right foundation when you're going into these deals, so that you can make sure it's a winner. You make sure that you're going to come out on top, and you can just keep doing it over and over and over again. Because if you get into a bad deal on your first one, that can set you back significantly, and then make you maybe not want to buy another property. Which is definitely not what I'd want for anybody.
Yeah.
It's all about continuing down this path and snowballing your real estate acquisitions.
Yeah, definitely. So just on a high level, I'm just going to try to review with you.
Yeah.
I guess what I've taken from this. And thankfully everything is in the comp criteria cheat sheet, so I can not have to memorize everything. I could just watch this video over, follow the sheet, everything will be good. Most important things, say I'm on Redfin, Zillow, MLS, type of property. So apples to apples, single family to single family. Sold comparables. So status is sold, always look at. Condition. So me, who's looking for a fix and flipper or an investor to buy my distressed property, like I want to look at the renovated ones, the fully renovated ones that are in the best condition, and then accurately estimate how much they would get after renovating my subject property for wholesaling, right?
Yep.
Sales date was very important, you said. 3 months, hopefully expand to 6, but you've gone even to 2 years because sometimes you have to, but try to keep it in that range if I can. Distance, location, also key factor. 0.5 miles from what I'm seeing, 0.5 miles if I can. And then same city and zip code, very important.
Yep.
Size, if for instance, like square footage, bedroom, lot count, you said, very important as well.
Lot size.
Yes. And then, bedroom, bathroom count as well. So I feel semi-confident. Hopefully when I'm back here, I'll have, given you accurate comps and you can destroy them as much as you want.
Happy to.
But also the advanced metrics for the appraisers, what they look at. Very valuable as well. And, I think having kind of that on hand in this cheat sheet as well is going to be really, really helpful for where I find
absolutely.
it.
So, from having looked at hundreds of appraisals and just having done the volume of deals that I've been involved with, I've studied these, and, I'm not expecting anyone who's running their own valuation to do a full-on appraisal like this.
Yeah.
Because there are other factors that go into the valuation. But what we've done, here at Real Estate Skills, is we've actually translated what's in here into a much more simplified version in our comp criteria cheat sheet.
Right.
So that you can get the best nuggets of all of this data and ultimately determine your valuation based on, all of the features that we have in here. So also in this download in our comp criteria cheat sheet, there is one of our tools and our resources for determining the after repair value.
Right.
So in
exactly
this,
what I need.
You're pretty much running the exact same process that an appraiser does. This is why I always say think like an appraiser.
Right.
Because what we're doing is we're understanding the subject property, right? We're taking account of all of its features, amenities, really I call it the subject property profile. So we need to understand our property very well. And then from there, we are finding the 3 to 5 comps, and we're doing the same thing with those comps. And we're breaking down all of the characteristics of those properties. And then at the end of really just stating the facts, we like to make the adjustments based on whether or not our property is better or it's inferior to the comparable property.
Right.
And so at the end of each comp, I like to make a little statement of why is this a good comp, and then what would our property sell for compared to this one. It's the adjusted sales price. So once you do that for 3 to 5 comps, you're going to have a very good idea of what the market will bear for your property that you're looking to fix and flip, or if you're wholesaling the property, your cash buyer is looking to eventually fix and resell. So you always want to justify that ARV with data, and you want to have a reason for why you're pulling these comps in the first place. So if you're going to take the time to run your comps, you might as well do them the right way.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at wholesale, you can provide your end buyer with this information, and it shows that you have taken the time to study the market and you are producing a great opportunity for them to fix and flip for a profit, based on the data. And it's everyone has access to this data as well. So your end buyers, your cash buyers are gonna see the same data. So why not show that you know what you're doing and separate yourself from amateur wholesalers? Be a pro wholesaler by running your own comps and running them well, and not producing comps that are completely irrelevant and are in a different zip code, and make the right adjustments too. So I think that's where a lot of newer wholesalers aren't really dialing in their ARVs with, by making the right adjustments.
Yeah, and for me, it's like a big part of like being a beginner is like the confidence issue, like coming to the table with nothing is what I usually feel like, or feel like if I don't have experience in a certain thing. But if I do my homework right, and I have all the data to back it, it's like, oh, like he actually is smart. He knows what he's doing. Like, even though there's not 1,000 deals under his belt, he can do it clearly, and that might be even more important,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is putting in the work. This is work, right? To run a comp and to, run they call it comparable market analysis. So it does take work, but that's how you get to know your market.
Yeah.
If you're serious about buying a property, if you're serious about wholesaling real estate, then you're going to need to know how to determine the value of a property, right? If you're running any real estate business, determining the values of real estate is one of the most valuable skills that you can have in the business. So it is totally, worth it. And this framework really breaks it down, and it boils it down to the essentials that you're going to need to be successful in this business. And so if you just follow this framework and you apply it to real life situations, you're going to find the right answers. You're going to find the right data, and you're going to be able to find your ARV, your after repair value with confidence.
Yeah.
Just from doing the work and scouring the data. Right?
Yeah.
It's all about the facts and the undisputable data. So it's taking taking a scientific approach, but there's also like an art to it as well. So knowing how to find the right properties, the most comparable, as far as the architectural style, the position in the neighborhood, the location. So there are some subjective aspects to it, which is why it's an opinion.
Right.
So I want to tie it back to when you're finding your ARV, it's still an opinion, right? I think a lot of newer wholesalers might think that there's one ARV for a property.
There's not.
It's not. It's just, what do I think that this is going to sell for? It's a projection, right?
Yeah. And the more data you have, the more accurate you will become.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the more you can substantiate your ARV, the better off you're going to be. The more, the easier it is for your cash buyers also to get behind that after repair value as well. So once you really run through this whole exercise and you take note of all the features, the facts, the price per square foot of all the comps, you can also figure out, what's the average price of those comps. You can also figure out what's the average price per square foot of those comps as well. And then you can multiply your square footage by that average price per square footage. And that just gives you an idea. That doesn't give you your final ARV, but it does give you more data points that you can run with. And so it is part of just putting more weight into the most relevant sales in your area, and also just taking note of, hey, what other properties are on the market? Are they not selling? Is there something wrong here? And then ultimately making your best guess, because ultimately it is an opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing's set in stone, but you're just trying to give them the most accurate information possible. And deals into the data, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
After 10 years of investing, how long does it take you to run a comp now?
It depends what the purpose is. If I'm just looking initially just to make an offer, I won't spend more than 5 minutes running an ARV. So
I'm trying to get to an offer a day, so that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can get to 5 offers a day pretty quickly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It just depends on, is this your first time looking at this market? Is this your first time looking at this neighborhood? So if it's a brand new market, brand new neighborhood, then it's going to take a little longer just to understand the nuances. Do properties in this area have basements, or how big of a factor is the lot size? Are you in an HOA that you need to kind of investigate a little bit more? So there are different factors, but I would say to get a rough idea, just really a few minutes of looking at the data, looking at the marketplace, and then if there aren't comps, sure, it might take a little longer to dig and really just find through other resources. If I'm looking to purchase for myself, if I'm looking to buy, fix, and sell a property, I'll take a little bit longer just to really understand a market, especially if it's a new area that I haven't purchased in before. So I like to geek out on the data because that's where a lot of the money is made. Yeah. Frankly, if you can buy at a lower price per square foot than the comps, if you can buy at a lower average price than the comps, you're getting in a baked in value that eventually the prices will continue to go up. So there's different clues in the data that will tell you if you're buying a good deal. So that's why it's just so important to know how to run the comps, how to find the comps, and then like you said, how to adjust for when you don't have perfect comps either.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, let's say you were beginner Ryan, anything that you wish you would have known running your first comps? Any beginner tips or tricks that you wish you had before kind of diving in, as I will very soon?
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of people will get bogged in this whole process and they'll slow themselves down. Especially if you're a wholesaler or fix and flipper, really honestly any strategy, the most important thing is to do an initial analysis and then get that offer in, make that call to the agent. I think a lot of people will spend an hour, 2 hours running comps and trying to just pull their hair out, figuring out what the best offer price is before even calling the seller, calling the agent, and understanding what's going on with this property. So I've had instances where I did spend, over an hour analyzing a deal only to call and say that and learn that the deal was already pending with another buyer. The seller had accepted another offer. So it is important to just call and then understand what's going on before spending so much time on any particular deal, and really just focus on sending more of a volume of offers and ultimately getting to a place where you're comfortable enough with the process, with an area where you can kind of determine value when you see properties hit the market and kind of know where a good sweet spot is. So it does take time. Early on, I was looking at, hundreds and hundreds of properties hitting the market. And once you do that, you get experience, you get a lens, you gain a muscle for looking at deals in your area, and you understand like what the price points are, what the ceiling of value is in a neighborhood, and then what the bottom is. And so once you look at a lot of properties, then you will start to get to know an area a lot better.
Right.
So there really isn't too many shortcuts. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy for newer investors or just inexperienced buyers to look at like a Zillow's estimate or kind of like use these convenient valuation softwares. Like there's a lot of just software around the internet these days claiming that They can tell you what the ARV of a property is or what a good purchase price is. But I would just suggest that everybody who's serious about real estate, take the time to learn how to run real estate comps, learn how to determine an ARV, and really just study your market, because ultimately it's you who needs to make that determination. It's you who needs to form your own opinion of value. And those algorithms, those estimates of value, those are usually very inaccurate. And I would never want to make an investment decision based on a Zestimate or an algorithm or some software that's going to tell me what the property value is, or where I should be buying it, or what it might be worth in the future. So I would just tell everyone to run their own comps, because that is one of the most important skills in real estate in general. So take the time to learn your market, take the time to learn this process, and absolutely, study our comp criteria cheat sheet, and run through that process a number of times on different properties. And then, ask us questions, ask our community questions, and just become a student, of your market and a student of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I can't obviously thank you enough. I mean, the resources that you guys provided me are obviously the most helpful thing in the world, but having this actual coaching is really kind of setting me into that investor mindset and giving me the confidence to actually start, and the fact that I'm free to come to you with questions like these, but you've probably seen every problem in the book at this point now, after 10 years, is just probably the most valuable thing in the world. So yeah, thank you very much for having me again. And hopefully by next time I'll have some comps. Maybe I'll even have a couple wholesale deals under my belt with everything that you've given me. But yeah, thank you so much again.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tim. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. I see what it can do for everyday individuals. Real estate's changed my life, and knowing how to run real estate comps has been a big part of the equation. Knowing how to uncover value and knowing what a right acquisition really is, whether I'm working with a client or whether I'm looking to buy something for myself, I'll run through this exact process every single time to know what I'm getting into, to know if it's a good deal, and ultimately to make the right investments. Because when you make the right investments, your whole life can change.
Yeah.
And if you make the wrong investments, your whole life can change, but for the worse, right?
Yeah.
So it's just so important to be a student, and I appreciate all the questions today, Tim, and it's definitely my pleasure to help you out, my man. So.
I can see why you have so many good reviews, I guess. It's just very, very good. Yeah, this has been amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tim. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. I see what it can do for everyday individuals. Real estate's changed my life, and knowing how to run real estate comps has been a big part of the equation. Knowing how to uncover value and knowing what a right acquisition really is, whether I'm working with a client or whether I'm looking to buy something for myself, I'll run through this exact process every single time to know what I'm getting into, to know if it's a good deal, and ultimately to make the right investments. Because when you make the right investments, your whole life can change.
Yeah.
And if you make the wrong investments, your whole life can change, but for the worse, right?
Yeah.
So it's just so important to be a student, and I appreciate all the questions today, Tim, and it's definitely my pleasure to help you out, my man. So.
I can see why you have so many good reviews, I guess. It's just very, very good. Yeah, this has been amazing.
Yeah, you got it, Tim. Well, it's been a pleasure. And remember, guys, if you want to get our real estate skills comp criteria cheat sheet that we covered today, as well as our framework for determining the after repair value on any property, go ahead and click the link in the description or go to realestateskills.com/comp to download your copy today so that you can start running comps and analyzing deals like a pro. If you guys like the content today, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as share this with someone who could benefit from this knowledge so that they can change their lives with real estate. Thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you got a lot of value and understand real estate comps. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.